Hello and welcome to Fighting Through Writing, your guided tour through the wild and wonderful word-laden wilderness that is competitive sports fiction writing. My name is Paul, I'm a competitive sports fiction writer, and if this is your first time here, you should know that this year I am on a mission to try and write the story that will help our protagonist El Pablo finally become the undisputed professional wrestling champion. In this episode, we find out basically whether that ambition lives or dies, because it is time for Stranglemania, the EWC's first pay-per-view of the season, the biggest pay-per-view in the entire fictional pro wrestling calendar, and it is time for the main event. El Pablo versus Cosmo Goldworthy, the EWC Undisputed Championship on the line. Now, I do have a bit of a confession. If you've watched these recap episodes before, you'll know that we normally start with me listening to the write-up of each show and kind of reacting in real time to the results as they come in. However, in this instance, with all the anxiety and the nerves and the borderline panic attack that waiting for this show was kind of instilling in me, I couldn't wait. I woke up at like 5 a.m. just to scroll through the results and see right off the bat how we'd got on, for the sake of my own sanity, if nothing else. So what I will do is I will leave a link in the description below for you, if you want to head on over there before we go any further, kind of read the results for yourself, and then we can discuss the fallout here together. Well, I'll wait. Okay, did you do it? Did you read it? Then good, because I can now reveal that your winner and new EWC Undisputed Champion, El Pablo. I mean, wow. I cannot tell you how many times I've had to read the show through since, just to try and get the reality of this to sink in. Like, after so many times trying before to get to this point and it never paying off, you know, you do start to wonder if it's ever gonna happen, if you're ever gonna be able to make that step. Even with starting this channel, I know that we kind of talked about that being the ambition, about this being the year that we see if we can finally write the story to get us that goal. But I don't know, there's a big difference between saying and doing, I suppose. And never even in my wildest dreams did I think that it would happen this quickly. Certainly I thought maybe 6 months or so we might get our first kind of opportunity at it, but no, there we go. A win over Cosmo, the reigning champion, a month, 6 weeks ago maybe at this point. That's what gets us the opportunity, that's what gets us the title shot, and now officially we have reached the mountaintop. El Pablo, after all he's been through in the past 20 years or so, after everything he's been through in the past 7 or 8 in this company, finally he can now stand above the rest and say that he is the undisputed champion. It's wild. I'm so stunned. So, like, I don't really know what to say. It's crazy. We did it. And the response from everyone else in the company, all my fellow writers, has been unbelievable. It's been so like heartwarming to see how supportive everyone's been about this, and how well everyone is enjoying the writing and is kind of connecting with the character and things like that. But in fictional wrestling, as in real fictional wrestling, time waits for no man, and apparently El Pablo's lust for gold and titles and championships cannot be satiated, because our next show, May 12th, 2025, Monday Night Brawl, episode 624, live from the Matthew Knight Arena in Eugene, Oregon, is going to see the Silent Discotecnicos, El Pablo and his brother Vertigo, taking on the Heat Packers for the EWC Tag-Team Championship. Now, this obviously is a rematch from the season premiere of the Prime brand, where the Discotechnicos lost those Tag Team Championships to the Heat Packers. And this is now the 4th meeting I believe, between the two teams, and every single one has been for those tag belts, which, if it's not some sort of record, I will be astonished. And I'd like to say that it was all kind of planned. I mean, we had the international championship defense by El Pablo against Morgan Darkwater the show before Stranglemania, then obviously the undisputed match at Stranglemania, and now the tag team titles as well. So we could very realistically end this little trio of shows with Pablo holding 3 separate championship belts, but we shall get into the writing of that particular story at a later date. For now, I'm just going to sit back, relax, bask in the glory a little bit. I feel like I've earned it. It's a funny little hobby, but it's a funny little hobby that now officially I'm the best at. So yeah, I'll see you in the next bit. Okay, it is Wednesday, which means it is time to start writing the next chapter in our story, the first chapter in the El Pablo Undisputed Champion era. Still doesn't feel any less wild to say. But yes, as previously discussed, rounding out the hat-trick of El Pablo's international championship defense against Morgan Darkwater at Brawl 623 and his winning the Undisputed Championship at Stranglemania, we now turn our attention to Brawl number 624 and the Silent Discotecnicos aiming to take back the Tag Team Championships from the Heat Packers in a rematch of the match that saw the Packers take those titles from the Discotechnicos at the Prime season premiere. Now, I haven't gone back and watched the video in which we wrote our promo for that match. Why would I do that? So I can't remember in the moment how I was feeling about it, but having gone back and reread it in the build up to this one, I think there's definitely things that I could have done better. And I mean, you know, look, we were under a 750 word limit, so there's not a huge amount of wiggle room and things like that. And I think I possibly got a bit too caught up in the setting and in the kind of the initial set piece of the whole thing, and I didn't really give myself enough space and enough opportunity to really get into the bones of the argument. However, on Brawl there is no such word limit, so hopefully that will give us enough space to not only tell a compelling story from a character point of view, but also let us get in all the relevant argument points and strategy and all the kind of things that will hopefully add up to a successful evening and to El Pablo completing his Thanos gauntlet of EWC Gold. Now, in terms of planning for this chapter, for this story, what I've done is I've put together a variation of the character wheel that I talked about a few episodes back. Basically just something to help me visualize the plot of the story behind this promo, but also all the key talking points that I want to try and work into the narrative as best as I can. So as you'll see on the screen here, each of these coloured dots represents a different talking point, and each dot is colour coded based on whether it's a who, a what, a where, or a how. So the pink dots are who, obviously a person relevant to this story. The green dots are a where, so either where this fight is taking place or a location within the story, within the promo itself. The blue dots are a what, so either a specific goal or aspect of a particular talking point, and the orange dots are a how, so that can be either a specific action that Pablo and the Silent Discotechnicos can take to achieve one of these goals, or how a specific aspect or descriptor might impact something. So I'll talk you through it and it'll all make sense once we get going. So as you can see here, Brawl 624, we are fighting the Heat Packers, aka Brody Dawson and Dan Funk, and they are 3 times EWC Tag Team Champions. They have beaten the Silent Discotechnicos twice for those championships. Their record against the Discotechnicos is currently 2-1, so they've won 2 and lost 1. And their record currently this year is 1-0, so they've had 1 match this season, which was against us. And I've also made a note of how they like to fight. So they're very much an old school NWA 80s kind of tag team. So they're all about divide and conquer, kind of cutting off the opponent's half of the ring and kind of just isolating one member of the team, wearing them down until they can get the win, which is exactly what they did to the Silent Discotechnicos at the Prime premiere when they won the belts for the 3rd time. It was a match in which one member of the Heat Packers was attached to a member of the Discotechnicos by a long cable covered in broken glass. Lovely. And the finish of that match basically had, I can't remember which Packer it was, but one of them hitting Vertigo with a move, and as he was pinning him, Pablo tried to break it up, but the other Packer that was attached to him kind of yanked on the cord, pulled Pablo away, so he couldn't break up the pin in time. So that is something that the Discotechnicos will obviously have to address in this piece when talking about them, and something that we will need to find a way for them to overcome. What they will also need to overcome is the fact that this match at Brawl 624 is a 60-minute Iron Man match, which is basically, as it sounds, a 60-minute long match. Whichever team gets the most pinfalls or submissions by the end of that 60 minutes is the winner. Now, this match is a Heat Packers speciality. It is also a Silent Discotechnico weakness. Why is it a weakness? Well, Vertigo and particularly Pablo are not strategic wrestlers. They very much subscribe to chaos theory, and theirs is a fighting style based very much on instinct and kind of fighting in the moment and thinking things up on the fly. So their great-grandfather, Signor Valando, the patriarch of the Valando family, he founded this idea of chaos theory in wrestling. So kind of essentially breaking a match down into individual moments that kind of split off and branch off from each other, like the butterfly effect in real chaos theory. And with a match like an Iron Man match, the longer it goes on, the more wide and varied those variables become. So from Pablo and Vertigo's point of view, it can be a lot harder to kind of plot the right path through the moments to get to the victory, if you know what I mean. So how can they counteract that? Well, I was thinking about this, and I think if it was a real fight, then the strategy I would take would be to absolutely hit it on the front foot, kind of go in there hard and fast, try and build up as big an early lead as you can, and then once fatigue starts setting in, and once the reserves kind of start running a little bit dry, that's when you pull back and you start running defense, and you essentially just kind of challenge your opponent to see if they can make up the difference in enough time, in whatever time is left. Now, that plays particularly well into Vertigo's strategy. He is, like El Pablo, very instinctive, but he is a lot more skilled in counter wrestling. So whereas Pablo's very much go on the attack and kind of try and overwhelm his opponents, Vertigo will kind of let the opponent come to him, but then read his attacks and use his own momentum against him to counter it or avoid it. So that kind of dynamic will, in theory, I think, play quite well into the Discotechnico strategy. So you can have Pablo take the lead in the early going, really try and, as I say, overwhelm the Heat Packers, and then when it comes time to pull back, that's when we let Vertigo take the lead and kind of do the counter wrestling and all that kind of thing. They both also can lean quite heavily on their pain endurance. So if you've followed this story for a while, you'll know all about their upbringing under their Uncle Viano and the kind of the hardships that they had to endure in his training. Equally, El Pablo's got a long history within the X division and hardcore wrestling and all these kind of brutal and barbaric kind of match types that he had to fight through when he was champion there. So in terms of endurance from that point of view, they are, at least in their own minds, kind of more than equipped to deal with that, even if they don't necessarily have the strategy and the sense of forethought that you might think a match like this would necessitate. So for the Heat Packers, on the other hand, like I said, this is their specialty. This is one of their matches that they really enjoy and they really excel in. Hence why they picked this to be the stipulation for this match. However, as we said before, this is their second match of the season, their first match since the premiere way back in February. So again, if this was a real fight, you would think that that length of time out of action going straight into an hour-long confrontation, you've got to wonder whether they're going to be susceptible to ring rust, whether they're just purely going to have the stamina at the right level to be able to get through that. We also found out when this match was announced at Stranglemania that Brody Dawson is injured, or at least was injured in that match. So he has a lot of neck problems and has supposedly been told by his doctors that he doesn't have many matches left, that he arguably shouldn't even be wrestling anymore in the first place. So yeah, again, you've got to wonder if he's going to be able to stand up to the kind of punishment and the kind of stamina that a match like this is going to demand, especially when a lot of the signature moves of the Silent Discotechnicos focus on the head and the neck. So then if we swing down to the other side, we've got, what is this match for? Obviously, it is for the tag team titles, which, if they are successful, gives Pablo and Vertigo the chance to become 3 times tag team champions as the Silent Discotechnicos, which would match the record currently held by the Heat Packers for most tag team championship reigns. It would also give Pablo his own record outright for being a 4-time tag team champions. He was also a champion with Ace King as part of Russian Roulette a couple of years ago, so that would give him the record. And the key factor in all of this is it would also give Vertigo the opportunity, in Pablo's mind at least, to earn his right to the Volando name. As my regular viewers will know, the entire motivation for El Pablo and for Vertigo is to earn themselves the birthright that they were always denied by their Uncle Viano, to be a part of the Volando family legacy. In Pablo's mind, having won the Undisputed Championship, he is now of the opinion that it's surely only a matter of time before he gets the phone call from Viano saying, okay, you've proven yourself, you may now be Pablo Volando. And so in his mind, he wants to bring Vertigo along with him. So if they win the tag titles at the same time, surely, again, that will prove to Viano that they are worthy of the name. All of which leads us finally to the setting for this place. Now, the show, this fight is set in the hilariously named city of Eugene, Oregon. And when it comes to thinking of a location for these stories, I generally will go on to TripAdvisor and look at kind of the top rated places to go. And as I was scrolling through, I saw a few hiking trails up in the mountains, and I thought that, that's a very easy kind of go-to for this being the first match since Pablo became the Undisputed Champion, since he reached the summit. So I thought originally, I think the closest one I saw was Mount Pisgah. I don't know how you pronounce it. There was also Spencer Butte, or the Pueblo Mountains, which would have been the perfect choice given, obviously, Pablo. Also, he was born in Pueblo City in Mexico. However, that is a 7-hour drive away, according to Google Maps. So I thought that was possibly stretching it a bit too far in terms of it being a local location. But as I was on Google Maps, kind of just scrolling fairly mindlessly around the rest of the area, I also saw a place called Mount Baldy, which one of their heat packers is a person with baldness. So I thought, is Pablo petty enough to set a promo in a location just because one of them's bald? Yes, he is. But I also figured we could justify that with the idea that because it's not a very tall mountain, it's also therefore better for phone signal for this supposed phone call from Viano that Pablo is convinced is going to be coming at any point. So yeah, that's kind of the vibe that we're going for. We've got 2 days and an hour or so now to get it all together. But yeah, I think it's a pretty solid argument, and yeah, I think there's some good stuff there. The benefit with this being, the fourth in the series between the two teams means that there's also a lot of prior interactions and experiences that we can also build off and bring into that story as well. So I'm going to knuckle down. I'm going to get cracking, get writing, and we shall reconvene a little later on and see how we're getting on. Okay, it is Friday. We've made decent progress, I think. We're on about 1,000 words, so I'd say we're about halfway through. It's definitely not going to be another 5,500 words or whatever the one we did for Stranglemania was, but that's okay. They can't all be novellas, and nor do they need to be, really. I wouldn't say it's been a struggle necessarily, but there's an expression that I've heard in football called after the Lord Mayor's show, which is basically where a team will kind of win a tournament or even just a real big match, and then the one right after that will kind of be a bit more sluggish and it won't kind of hit the same sort of heights, just where they've obviously exerted so much effort in that original game. Kind of feeling that way with this one. Obviously I put a huge amount of myself into the story that we wrote for Stranglemania. Equally, right before that we had the international championship match between El Pablo and Morgan Darkwater, so that's two kind of real high profile bits of writing, one after the other, and then having this one as well rounding out the hat trick. It's a lot, but I still feel pretty good about what we've got down here so far, and I think the idea is still certainly solid enough to put us in a good place. I added in a little scene at the start of it, kind of basically just having Pablo reflect on his big win at Stranglemania right after the fact. I think where this kind of writing is very episodic, I think it's always good to kind of have that recap right off the bat, just to follow on from recent events and show how your character is responding to that. But also, if someone happens to be reading this particular piece as their kind of first introduction to your character, then you want to give them that bit of prior context and things like that, just so they've got a bit of a better idea of where your character sits within the world. That's why I always try to not introduce each character necessarily, but always kind of pretty quickly establish who each character is and their relationships to each other, which you wouldn't necessarily do obviously in a proper novel or book or anything like that. But again, where these are quite episodic and you're not necessarily going to be reading them all at the same time, or you'll have new people jumping in again at different points. So I think it's always good to have those little indicators there, just to make the reading experience for everyone as seamless as possible, whether they're a regular reader or not. But yeah, we have that little recap and reaction section, and we then transition to find our regular trio, Pablo, Vertigo and Varana, in the mountains outside of Eugene, Oregon, Mount Baldy, as I highlighted in the last section. That's where we find ourselves right now. We're just about at the point where we're going to start talking about the Heat Packers and about the match directly. Yeah, let's see how we go. And that, I think, will do it for this episode of Fighting Through Writing. The story's done. We submitted it over the weekend and we clocked in at just under 3,000 words. I think it was about 2,900, give or take. I certainly don't think it quite hit the heights of our Undisputed promo, perhaps obviously, but I think the arguments are definitely solid. I struggled a little bit more with the kind of the location side of things and trying to kind of draw as much as maybe I wanted to out of that, but it is what it is. But yeah, I think it's pretty good. As with everything, the proof will be very much in the pudding, to coin a phrase, to steal a cliche. But yeah, if you would like to read it yourself, I will, as always, leave a link in the description for you to do that. I can't remember if I mentioned it in the previous video or not, but I'm actually in the process of setting up a proper WordPress site with all of my writings on from way back when I started in this company in 2017. So you'll be able to go back and kind of read this particular part of the El Pablo saga from the beginning. So yeah, please do go and check that out. Give this video a like, give it a comment, subscribe to the channel if you're not already. In the next episode, we shall react to the results of this match and yeah, see if El Pablo can complete the Thanos gauntlet of EWC Championships. Thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you next time in this undisputed era of fighting through writing. Hello and welcome to Fighting Through Writing, your guided tour. Bloody hell, scamp.